is the Fusion Basket.
Hello, I'm Justin Oldham. I'm the author of Being Legally Blind, which was published in 2010. After the book came out, I got a lot of email asking me for more details about my childhood and, more importantly, asking me for more details about my parents. So I thought it would be rather appropriate to share a conversation with you that I had with my father by telephone about this book. The one thing I would like to say for the benefit of future generations who may not be able to relate to some of what you're about to hear is that I was born at a time when a great deal of the medicine and surgical techniques that you take for granted today did not even exist. As a matter of fact, many of the medical pioneers that are responsible for the advances that are so commonplace in your world today, they were just little kids when I was a little kid. So just keep that in mind as a matter of historical context. And some of what you're going to hear from my father is also a matter of historical context because he's a product of the times in which he lived. It has to be one of the worst things in the world for any parent to be told by a doctor that your son or your daughter is disabled in some way. Parents of visually impaired children need to understand one thing, and I say this as a person who has lived the life. We're going to grow up with this, we're going to live with it, and we're going to die with it, which means it is our version of normal. And that doesn't make it better, but it does make it okay. And part of what you'll get to do in the course of your own lifetime is make your peace with that. And some of what you're going to hear from my father in the next few minutes is what he did to make his peace with my condition. And I'm not trying to understate this at all, because every parent who has to shoulder this burden feels like they did something wrong. There was something you didn't know that you should have known, or you feel guilty because you did this to your child. Well, this is nature, and this is life, and just like you have to live with it, we have to live with it. So this is what it's all about, and that's why I titled the book Being Legally Blind. There is no sin involved here. There is no shame connected to this. It is who and what we are. And someday, as we get older, as we get more educated, as we become more professionally successful, we might just surprise you with the things that we do, especially when we use everything you taught us. So keep that in mind as you listen to what my father has to say over the next 40 minutes. Thank you and have a good day. Let's go back a ways before I was born. Now, after you and Mom got married, where did you folks go?
Okay, we got married February 10th, 1961 in Reno, Nevada. I was in the Navy. We went from there to San Diego, and I was deployed again in the Navy. And when we returned to San Diego, and I was promoted, so I had a chance to travel. So we decided to go to Japan, and we were transferred to Iwakuni, Japan, Marine Corps Air Station, which is a Marine Corps base. Very few dependents on it. So we ended up in Japan, and we decided not to have any kids for a while. And just prior to getting out, we wanted to have our first one while we were in the service. So we had you were born 6 weeks before we left Japan.
I understand there's an interesting story there, because I guess you almost didn't fill out some paperwork.
Yeah, when you were born, I had to go from Iwakuni, Japan, to southern Honshu. Anyway, we had to go down to Fukuoka, where the U.S. Embassy was, and register you as a U.S. citizen. After 6 weeks, you would automatically become a Japanese citizen. And we had to go through formalization to make you a U.S. citizen. So as soon as you were born, 4 or 5 weeks, went to Fukuoka, the American Council, you became a registered American citizen. And when you were about 6 weeks old, we returned by ship, military transport, to San Diego, where I was discharged from the Navy, and we settled in San Diego. I immediately went to work with Rohr Corporation as an inspector. And when you were about 4 months old, your mother took you to the doctor for the first time. And at that time, it was noted you didn't have any irises in your eye. So that was the beginning of discovery of your impairment. So one thing led to another. One thing that caught us off guard is we had no knowledge of anything. Like I say, being in Iwakuni, that was a Marine Corps base where very few dependents was. So through your mother's pregnancy, they didn't know what to follow. And then when you were born, between your birth and leaving was such a brief period, nobody got a chance to examine you and everything. We got out and was stationed or living in San Diego. Your mother took you to the doctor and found out that you did have a problem, aniridia. We didn't know what to do. Well, we were struggling because we didn't have any medical insurance at that time. Medical coverage was in 65 was basically non-existent for the average worker. So I quit that job and went to work for the civil service, where eventually I would have been provided medical coverage. In the meantime, without my military obligation being totally over with, I joined the California Army National Guard, so I would have a lapover benefit, not knowing what to expect. So when as I worked and was in the reserves, I thought we were covered. The Vietnam War come along, and my reserve unit was activated for the Vietnam conflict, which put me right back in the service. So I decided at that point maybe it was the best thing to do to go active service, active duty, and stay for the medical benefits, which turned out to be a prudent choice. You had the best of the best care all the way through your growing up years. You was never denied anything. You know, you've been to Walter Reed, you've been to Valley Forge, you've been to the big hospital in Virginia, you've been to Seattle, been Bath, Madigan. So you've had some of the best care that was available. You've been to Virginia Mason. Oh, no, that was Swedish Hospital, right? And all of that was a plus because our commitment to the medical issue. Like I say, we were blindsided with a diagnosis, and we never knew anything. But one thing that we did do early on in our marriage, we waited 4 years to have our first child, so we got to experience a lot of things as a young couple. But once you came along and the decision was made that your mother was going to be a stay-at-home mom and take care of you, or take care of the house and the family. We both came from a family that both had mothers and dads at home. So her staying at home, being a stay-at-home mom, was just normal for us, and it turned out quite well. Being in the service was an option that really paid off. And then when your mother was diagnosed with her cancer, we got a double dip of goodness out of that process.
Now, you mentioned that in 1965, that there were very few medical options, and that's going to be hard for people to relate to in today's world. So would you talk just a little bit more about that? Because I know how extensive the Army medical benefits were, but those kind of things just weren't available for the average person at that time.
Yeah, there was no medical. Joe, your mother's dad had cancer, and Mary worked for Campbell Soup, so they had a little bit of medical, but not much. So they basically depended on Sacramento County Hospital. This was before you were born, and her dad had extensive surgeries and everything else as a result of the cancer. Well, the cancer came pretty expensive. One day we got a letter from the county. They wanted us to pick up the difference between Mary and Lyle's insurance and what was owed. Well, that was our introduction to real insurance. We knew nothing. So as that developed, we of course had to say we don't have the money, which we didn't. We were just surviving from paycheck to paycheck. And the medical issue, being young, was a non-issue because we never experienced anything where we needed it. In today's world, it was quite different. Like today's world, that people without insurance, where do they go? they go to the emergency room, and the hospital picks up the bill. And in those days, they, I guess, basically had the same option. We were fortunate we never got sick.
That is an important thing to understand, and I can only imagine what kind of conversations you and Mom had in those early days in regards to me, and because my imagination has never really stopped running, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, Being Legally Blind: Observations for Parents of Low Vision Children, because even still to this day, as I stop and think about it, I can imagine what it was like in the 1970s to try to have to deal with somebody in my condition, and there was just so much that you just had to make up as you went along, which is not the case today. Now we have agencies and resources that didn't exist back then, but
Totally, yeah.
I can just imagine how it felt like just having to make it up as you go along.
In the 65, when you were diagnosed and everything, all we had was ourself, your mother and I. We just had the two of us. And of course, we turned inward to the family. Our challenge was to raise you, and we put off having another child for a while. As a matter of fact, 4 years, almost, well, short of 1 day, 4 years, we put off having another child. But that didn't deter us from living. We had a child with a disability, but we did everything as a family unit. All your life, whenever we went somewhere, we all went together. Whenever we did something, we all did it together. So that was, I think, a lot of our upbringing, because everybody did everything out of the 40s and 50s and early 60s as a family unit, because we didn't have the possibility of the activities we have today. We were dedicated as a family. We didn't know any different.
Now, speaking of what you did know and what you didn't know, I want to go back in time here for a little bit and dredge up an old memory. And this is one of several that stands out in my mind as still important today. I can recall when I was 5 years old, when we were in Georgia, when I asked you for the first time in the most serious way that I could, in my own child's way, what I did ask you was, how come you made me this way? And I remember your response at the time was, we just didn't know. And flash forward years later, when I'm 12, Sacramento, California, after Mom's funeral, you took me to your old high school, and we were walking through the place, and you showed me the library. And you pulled one of the old textbooks off the shelf, and you said, I used to read this. And it was one of the science books, and I remember looking at in the back of the book, in the index, and there was nothing in there about genetics as we understand the term today, and it really truly wasn't until that moment that I actually finally believed that you really didn't know. And that's important in the context of this book, because even still to this day, surrounded by this bounty of medical technology and 21st century information, it is still really easy for parents to just not know, and they need to be forgiven that lack of information, because it's not deliberate.
We were blue-collar people. We were working people. My dad was a businessman. My mother was a stay-at-home mom. And when I went into service, I was a blue-collar. I was an enlisted man. I worked. Your mother, she worked a little bit from time to time, but we did a lot of moving around, so for her to get a job was kind of out of the question. And, well, you're right. We did not know. None of this genetics was available at the time. DNA, the genome, this was we're all in research at the time. And not being from the medical community, i.e. having relatives in the medical community, all we did was we just live from day to day and assume a normal husband-wife-child relationship. That's all we had.
What are the earliest battles that you remember having to fight with doctors or teachers?
The earliest battle was right after you were diagnosed. You were an infant. You were less than a year old. Doctors didn't know what to do. Doctors could look at you and say, yeah, he didn't have an iris. We don't know what to do. There's nothing you can do about it. You showed enough signs of you were normal. You recognized voices. You recognized movement and everything. So it wasn't that absolute critical. You weren't totally blind. You were limited vision. Technically, you were diagnosed as being legally blind, but you could see shadows move and everything. So we took that positively, and like I say, we made the conscious decision of being a stay-at-home mom. Your mother was a stay-at-home mom, and we benefited tremendously from it.
Now, the thing that I learned very early on, between the ages of 5 and 10, was that I had to be my own advocate, which meant that I had to know my situation inside and out, and the most difficult thing for me to do day in, day out, week in, week out, was to have to explain myself to adults that were not ready to hear those explanations from a child. So I'm particularly interested in the battles you had to fight, because as an adult armed with the same information I had, you still had to meet the same resistance that I did.
We found what I found with you and your mother. We kept everything private. Our family life was our family life, and everybody functioned within the family. You were treated as a normal, everyday child. You rode bicycles, you fell off trikes, you did all of the things. So we functioned as a normal family, where we found not so much resistance, more standoffish. People didn't know how to treat us because we did not cater to your impairment. We treated you normal, and you got to do all kinds of things. What haven't you done in your life? You've done everything. You've canoed, you've snow machined, you've four-wheel, you've gone fishing, you've been on hunting trips, you've been, you shot guns, though there were 22s, but whatever you did, it was mainstream. Where the resistance we found is people didn't know how to treat your mom and I and you, because they thought you should maybe been treated different than a normal thing.
Yeah.
Remember when you were in those little race cars? You were only about 9 years old.
Pinewood Derby.
Yeah. What would you do? You did the work, and the guys that won, usually their dads did the work. But you did the painting, you did everything else, and the sanding. You were maintained. And our resistance in the community, people didn't know how to treat us. When your mother was sick with cancer, when you got your first corneal transplant, people knew at work that you had a transplant, but it wasn't publicized. It was in the family with your mother and her cancer and everything. I never let your impairment or your mother's impairment overflow into my professional career. Was to provide a standard of living for my family, sacrifices and all. You had the best of medical, the best houses. You always had a new car. You never went without food. The whole focus was on the family. My career being separate, people didn't know how to treat us.
Now, I want to make an important point here. What you're talking about is not hiding from the problem, but being in control of it. And, it's the old wisdom that our grandparents gave us. You own it, or it owns you, and, one is obviously better than the other.
No, that's true. We never hid from it. That was just, we took life head on as it was. But like I say, the biggest obstacle that I remember people did not know how to interface with us. A lot of people would look at you and they want to compare you to a sighted kid, knowing that you weren't sighted, and it was frustrating to them. How come Justin's riding his bicycle or riding his whatever? Why is he doing this and this and this? Well, that's the way you were raised. Mainstream, and that was the frustration of a lot of people. They thought, well, you should be cuddled, you should be protected, you should be this and that. And even in school, when you were in school, you got to do what? You got to choose your instruments. You were 100% supported in whatever you wanted to do. You got to play an instrument for a while until you decided not. You wrestled, you run track, you really started to shine as you got into your high school years and got into speech and literary type subject. Well, we let you find your buoyancy, and then once you found it, then we supported you 100%. And
I'll let you in on a little insider secret here. The whole secret to riding the bicycle was actually to walk the neighborhood first, figure out where everything was, and then once I had that memorized, then actually riding a bicycle without hitting things was a piece of cake. And the only time I ever hit stuff is when I violated that rule.
That's right. When you were riding the snow machine, if you had stayed right behind us and went over the embankment, you would have still been, you wouldn't have had that experience. That was probably one of the few times your mother became overly protective. I don't know if you remember that or not.
Oh yeah, we had an incident there, and
where we were all parked in a line, and you pulled off the right to go around us.
The brake was the brake, as you may not remember this, but the brake on that snow machine didn't work, and you guys were all stopped, and I had two choices. If I turned left, I was going to go into traffic, and if I turned right, I was going to go down into a deep ditch, and I decided at the last possible second that the ditch was better than the road because I didn't want to get killed by a car. But unfortunately, I did get hurt pretty good by going in that ditch, and it pretty much put me off of snow machine riding for a while.
Yeah, and like I said, that's probably the only time your mother became overly protective in what you do. But the rest of the time, everybody, you did within your own limits. You went on Boy Scout canoe trips. You went on Boy Scout outings and everything. That was just our way of saying your impairment was just, that was life. And we never tried to protect you from it, and you're not as scared of life today.
That's very true. We
have friends that have impaired kids that are so protected that they're still at home. Remember when you were 18 years old? We sat down and had a talk. I said, all right, you're majority age, you're 18. You can do with the family, or you can make your own decisions and go wherever you want to do. If the family goes somewhere, if you want to go, you're welcome. If you don't want to go, you're welcome not to go. All that did was give you footing. We still continue to do everything as a family, but we did recognize your independence. And the hardest two things any impaired parent, impaired child's parents will ever have to do, one is let your child go, and secondly, stay out of their decision-making process unless asked for advice. We've got friends that got 35-year-old kids at home and they're still thinking for them. That's no good. What happens when the parents die? The child's left. Look at you. You made your decisions. You went to university. You got 2 degrees. You worked a while. You had your ups and downs. Who doesn't have ups and downs? Now you're starting to succeed in the business world. But those are your decisions, and you were supported by your mother and me, your family, and now you and your wife are supporting each other. So I think that is more normal than trying to shield or protect from an impairment.
This program is brought to you by Shadow Fusion Books.
As I look back in hindsight now, the single largest impediment that I ever faced was teachers, honestly. from first grade on all the way through college, I always encountered teachers, professors, instructors who always had an excuse for me to not do, and it was their way of caring, it was their way of helping. But it was virtually impossible for me to get through to these people to tell them that by shielding me from these things that I was supposed to learn, that they were not helping. And so I want to know what was that like for you as a parent?
We never, if they wanted to dilute your experience, we ignored it. We gave you the openness to choose your path and support it. And yeah, a lot of people would want to run interference and protect you from the rest of the world. And growing up, the world don't really care about your impairment. They're more competitive than anything else, and they're good-hearted. Their intentions are earnest, but they don't know how to handle the challenges of life other than a totally functioning, literate, a literate, eye-sighted, fully sighted person. That's all they're really trained to deal with. When you get into the specialty areas, all they try to do is make the door wider and the steps less and all that other stuff. But that doesn't teach you to navigate life.
And I look back on my grades, and it's rather obvious if anybody looks at my transcripts from first grade on through college that the areas in which I failed, in which I did not succeed, were visually oriented. But
yeah.
The majority of things that I learned turned out to not be visually oriented, and so I did excel in those areas, and I cite that as proof that you don't actually have to see half of what you do.
It's strange that you say that. What your grandfather worked for the Western Union. He could type about 175, 180 words a minute on a conventional typewriter. He'd been a Western Union guy. He didn't have a high school education, but he had a tremendous dexterity, control, and vocabulary. He wrote many, many books. We don't know anything about his family. He was estranged from his family. Your grandmother on your mother's side, she was college educated. She was a school teacher. Your mother had a tremendous grasp of the English language. People used to come to her and have her grade their papers and write letters and everything else. When it come to the checkbook, she couldn't balance a checkbook. She was lousy in math. When it comes to me, my mother's college educated, I'm college educated, I'm technical. Math is very easy for me. Command of the English language, I have to work at it. Your sister is the same way. She has an English degree. She's very, very strong in English. She has to work at balancing a checkbook. So these genetics are coming down. None of this was mainstream when we were young raising you. All of these advances have all been studied and pointed out through our university system, which, to me, I think is great that we have a luxury in our society where we can explore the different avenues. Our technology is advanced to the point that enough people, we only need a few people to make everybody fat and happy and keep everybody employed. And you're part of that because you come away and you've come a long ways. Look at what the future offers for people with the impairments, any impairment.
Well, that's very true because the doctors have always been telling me that in spite of the visual gains that we make with each new surgery, that blindness is eventually in my future. And I got to tell you, because of the medical technologies that exist now, and because of what's on the drawing board, that prospect really just doesn't scare me.
Our life was so routine, especially during our working years, that that's what it was all about. You get up in the morning, shower, shave, get dressed, and you didn't have to think or move or open your eyes until you went downstairs or went into the kitchen. You're right.
And the funny thing is that this does translate into our regular workaday lives. Once you've learned a skill, it's not unreasonable to say that in the course of an average workday, you don't actually have to look very closely at all at half of what you do, and if it were necessary, you could probably do those things under a blindfold. So, when it comes to that, being low vision really isn't so bad.
Another thing that influenced you, I went to the school. I went to night school forever. Your mother would stay at home. I'd work all day, and I'd go to night school, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. At one point, I graduated. Your mother made a great big deal out of it. You and your sister were in school. You were taught from day one you were going to get a college education. Education ended, formal education ended when you graduated from college. So when you graduated from high school and your sister, you both went into your freshman year, sophomore year, junior year. You stayed a little bit longer. You got a second degree. She got her degree. So that was an important part of the family influence on you. We knew that education was the key to the future. You were taught from day one how important it was, and when it come time for you to go to school, there was not 1 second of resistance or resentment. You went to school as normal, just like the way you were raised. You were raised as a normal sighted child.
Now, what do you say to parents today who are going to hear this conversation and they're going to say, I can't do that?
The parents don't care so much about the kids. They care more about themselves. Does it hurt to see you fall down the ladder, fall off the slide? It hurt tremendously. But how are you going to know that stepping off a 2-story balcony will hurt you? You have to step off the step ladder. You have to step off the steps wrong so that you learn how to negotiate, how to navigate your surroundings to survive. Is it hard? You bet it is hard. You have to. You have petrified me in Pennsylvania and up here in the Arctic and everything at times. But with proper guidance and then letting you experience what you've been taught and what you've been told, that's the only way you're going to be able to do it. You've lived in the interior of Alaska, and in the winter it's dark. That is a challenge to the parents to stay on top of the child. You get off the school bus, you had to come home. You had to come. That's why it was so important in your mother being a stay-at-home mom, and it paid off. The challenges of letting you do some of these things are more important than the parents' feelings of overly protecting them, because when you overly protect them, you are protecting yourself from any possibility of a hurt, emotional hurt.
Because I have spent so much of my time outside the system, that when I deal with teachers, administrators, program providers of all sorts, in many respects I'm treated as a heretic, and I don't mind telling you that that's a badge of honor that I wear with a great deal of pride.
Yeah, well, you have to be confident in yourself. How do you develop that in the confidence in self in your child? And that's where it becomes difficult for the parents.
And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to write this book, is to lay out the challenges and the hurts and the failures so that people at least have some idea that this kind of stuff is coming. And as the old saying goes, just knowing is half the battle.
Being a stay-at-home mom in today's world is fairly easy if you step aside from the material world. We grew up, we had a TV, we had a stereo, we had good clothes, we had a nice house. But the kids today, with so many trappings around with cell phones and iPods and all of the other stuff, to be a stay-at-home parent is you're going to have to be on your toes. A lot of the toy manufacturers and the gadget manufacturers prey upon the guilt of parents that work. That's why all these dual income families have so much junk in their house, is that the mom and the dad are trying to buy the kids love by giving them things, and because they feel guilty because they're working all the time. We addressed that, but we lived within our means. Now, granted, I made a very successful transition in the military, and money was not really an overstressed object because we lived within our budget.
I can remember the fact that I didn't have an allowance, but I was always told that I could do anything I wanted with the money that I made, and it actually encouraged me to be resourceful. And very routinely, even in my high school years, I was usually the kid with the most money, just because I actually had to go out and get it.
Yeah, but we allowed you to do that. And most of your neighbors, they looked at you, you're just a normal kid in the neighborhood. You and Steve, we would get out there and do things there in their way. And Steve was sighted, you weren't. But you guys played the same game.
That's very true. That's true. And then one of the things I can say about most of the kids that I knew was that they weren't judgmental of me until they picked up the prejudices of their parents.
Or the peer group pressure. You're more familiar with peer group pressure than I am. Like I said, our family, we had a family circle. We turned inward. Our challenges were ours. They weren't part of the world. I kept my family life very separate from my professional life, and I think it was beneficial. The people I've served with were still great friends, and some of the more senior people, you remember John Edgar, Chaplain Edgar, we've been the best of buddies for 40 years.
Okay, and, I want to backtrack here for a second here. What would you say are, because this isn't covered in my book, and I know it's important, what are the most basic rules that you would cite for how do you keep your child's disability out of your work life?
I don't talk about it. My seniors, my supervisors know I have a problem. I do not play my wife she or my boy this or my boy that. I need this, I need that. It's never played. I accepted my challenges. As my challenge. It did not overflow into my career. My career, being an officer, was very demanding. Being a pilot, I could not be distracted from what my family obligations when I was doing my professional obligations. They cannot mix. And I benefited tremendously from it. I've never not experienced 100% support from my superior. I have talked to some of my fellow pilots. They never noticed any dereliction of duty based upon for me. They always looked at me as a professional, but they've told me they didn't know how to talk to me. I have an impaired son. My wife was dying of cancer, or my wife died of cancer. I was a single parent. Life went on just as normal, and that's how we've always conducted ourselves. Life was normal. The curved balls that we got thrown at us, we just took in stride. And I think a lot of I've seen people use their wife, my wife, she, or this or that, and it was detrimental to their career. Some of them got released from the service because they couldn't perform. My family. I had to have a job to support my family, so I was able to keep the two distinguished. I've seen kids where their family decisions, wants and dislikes and likes were dominant in their career. Their career suffered, and eventually most of them never made a final decision of making a 20-year career. They were eliminated somewhere along the way, due to lack of promotion or whatever. When I was in civilian life, my professional life stayed at work, and when I come home, we did things together. I never took my personal life to my work, and that's a challenge. One reason why I do it, I hate to explain to everybody every little glitch in life, but yet you sit around and listen to other people talk in conversation at tables. What do? They talk about their problems. Like my problems are mine and my family, and that's where we kept them.
Yeah, it's interesting you make that point, because even today, as an adult, I mean, I'm 45 and you're 70, so we're pretty far along here. But even still, as an adult today, part of the way I have to fight my battles is I have to explain myself all the time. So there are days when I feel like I'm a parrot, because I have to repeat the same explanations over and over and over again, and the only comfort I draw is the fact that it's the same explanation, but it's always to different people.
There you go. You're always trying to explain why. And some of the people, out of sheer ignorance, ask the stupidest question, especially somebody that has a minimal amount of medical experience or technical experience. They want to put you on the same plane that they're on. It don't work.
Let me be clear on one very important point, because there's people that are going to listen to this who are going to be insulted by what you just said. And I know exactly what you meant, because you always told me that the only stupid question is the one you don't ask. And when we mean stupid in this case, what we're really saying is uninformed, and that's something that everybody with a disabled child is going to have to deal with, because from now on until the day you die, you're always going to be bumping into uninformed people.
Right. Most of them are good intention, but like I say, they come to the situation with just enough curiosity to ask a question without them fully understanding what they're asking. But like I say, their good intention, best intention is put forward. I think a lot of them say that to make themselves feel good rather than feel guilty that the impairment is there.
That's true. As I've said in the book, at least 4 different places that I can think of, that is a large part of how you win your battles and how you prevent people from asking the same question over and over again. Is you just be upfront and above board about it, because when it is known, when it is seen, when it is obvious, then nobody has to ask you what you're hiding.
Yeah.
That's another reason why I wrote this book, is to make a sincere effort to bridge this gap. And it's not just a marketing ploy on my part, although I think it is rather genius. But when I say that this is the book that I would have given to my own parents if I could have, then I mean that in all seriousness, because everything that you and I have just talked about for the last 45 minutes here is encapsulated in this document, and it's a conversation that we can have in hindsight, but people who are dealing with these issues for the very first time, they don't get to have this conversation until they've lived the life.
That's right.
You've been listening to The Fusion Factor, brought to you by Shadow Fusion Books. Find us online at shadowfusionbook.com.